So we are really thrilled to be here today. And you've already heard our panel, brief introductions of these incredible people we get to be in dialogue with today. And we really want to look at the changing role of philanthropy and investment. So when I think of the theme of this panel, one of the things is make friends. So when we're thinking about how do you make change, the idea of working with diverse stakeholders, how do we get philanthropy to move dollars, to be a bridge to government funding, how do we get businesses involved, and for each individual to think about whoever you are, wherever you are, what can you do with what you have right now? And that works best when you have friends, people you can work with across sector. So we only have a short bit, so I'm going to jump right into it right now. So I'm going to start with you, Julie Morita, who is the CEO of the Joyce Foundation, who has worked also in public health for decades, has worked in philanthropy, to really think about, first of all, when you look at funding, when you are thinking about impactful giving, what is it that you're looking for and who do you choose to fund?
Thanks so much, Emily, and thanks to all of you for being here and for all the great work that you are doing. It's just really an honor to be able to talk about the Joyce Foundation's work, but also to see all of you across sectors really partnering to address this issue that is so critical to our nation. The Joyce Foundation's been in existence for 75 years. We have supported gun violence prevention for over 30 years. And that's something that's kind of unusual because it is perceived as being quite risky in the past. And I think that's one of the privileges of being in private philanthropy is that we can kind of look at the long game. I think we heard Mike Dowling talk about that a little bit in terms of needing to look at the long game in order to address these kinds of issues that are so important. It's also we can take risks because we don't have board members that are breathing down our necks saying you have to manage to a bottom line. We can actually do work that's really important to us and to do the work because of the work, not because we want to save our jobs. So it's, in many ways, philanthropy is privileged to be able to do that. And so because of that, Joyce has really focused on gun violence prevention for a long time. I think what we do is, in terms of gun violence prevention, is we focus on the places where others were not working in this space. And so 30 years ago, there was a bill that actually froze NIH and CDC research into gun violence policy. And so Joyce really stepped in to support policy, gun violence policy research. And so that was something we've been doing for a long time, and we waited patiently for opportunities to lift up the evidence, list up the data to actually inform different kinds of governmental policies. And so the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act actually reflects some of the research that was supported by Joyce decades ago. And so it's really a thrill to be able to be in this place where we can actually see the impacts of the work that we're doing. But we don't do that alone. We also because we can take risks, we can support work that's our partners do, like Live Free, which actually Pastor Mike is a grantee of ours and has been for 12 years. And we support work that is really innovative, community violence intervention. Before it was really well established and really well known, we were supporting the work with Pastor Mike, and doing this kind of work in the communities. And so we have the privilege to look at the long game. We also have a responsibility to do good things with the work, with the money that we have, and also to partner with strong partners and to listen to our partners in terms of what they're experiencing and what their needs are, so that we are responsive to community, not just top down saying, you must do what we say. You don't just do what we say you should do. Please let us know what the needs are and how can we be most supportive and most responsive. And so it is really through partnership. And so that's the last thing I'll say, is that we're always looking for cross-sector partners. And that's what thrills me about this convening, is that people are just across a wide range of sectors participating and looking for opportunities to jump in. And so that's what we're looking for, as well as how can we leverage the assets and resources of other agencies, other organizations, other governmental entities to actually further the work that's such a top priority for us.
Thank you so much, Julie. I think we'll go right into a conversation with Reverend Michael McBride. So Pastor Mike is the executive director, as we've just heard, of Live Free USA, which is a national racial justice and community organizing network, has done work, served on President Obama's Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships Council, is a regular contributor to media. I really like to hear you in conversation with Joyce Foundation. So you all have been in partnership for about 15 years. Can you talk a little bit about how philanthropy has enabled you to do some innovative solutions and what you've seen that's worked?
Yeah, it's great to be here, and thank you for having me here, and certainly shout out to all my comrades in the audience who We all trailblaze this stuff together. In our organizing work, we train our folks to think about building power, right? Power, agency to change the worst conditions in our own communities. We often say that disorganized truth will find it difficult to defeat an organized lie. And so organizing, in our mind, is organizing people, it's organizing ideas, and it's organizing money. Somebody say amen, right? Amen. And so part of our challenge, I think, throughout the years have been that the way in which we have been able to access the resources necessary to scale up the kind of work that is about saving the lives of those most directly impacted by gun violence in largely Black and brown communities, disinvested communities. That work is traditionally funded, when it is funded, through philanthropy. And so having partners like Joyce to help us to build advocacy, organizing, program implementation, innovation has been helpful. This is our 15th year doing this work. I remember when a foundation would not give you a stick of gum to do gun violence prevention work, right? I remember when politicians would tell us that guns are the third rail of politics and we won't talk about guns. Some 15 years later, it appears that everybody is an expert on gun violence and a technical assistance provider and knows how to save Pookie and Ray Ray's life even if they're never proximal to them, right? And so one of our challenges is how do we build power that is organizing people, ideas, and resources in a mutual reciprocal partnership, rather than one that can be hierarchical, exploitative, or extractive. And that means that there has to be a serious kind of long walking together, right? Not episodic, not seasonal, but a commitment. And often, unfortunately, that commitment has to be buttressed by the power of organizing, building power of people directly impacted, because for many of us, our struggle does not go away depending on who's the president, or who's the mayor, or who's the governor. It is a outlasting challenge. And the blessing I find is that who also outlasts presidents and mayors and governors? Philanthropy, banks, businesses. Somebody say amen, right? Amen. I mean, we're going to test it out, I guess, for the next few years. But all of that being said, we must, I think, have these partnerships. And I do think it's really important for us to take seriously that if we aren't in deep relationships with each other, then even our best efforts can often betray us.
Thank you so much, Pastor Mike. I think we got a lot of amens to that.
Church on a Thursday.
So now, I did just hear you say, philanthropy, banks, community, the struggle continues, that maybe it doesn't matter who is in office or not. I do want to make sure we have government voice here as well. We have a lot of people who represent government, and it does, we want to think about how do we hold hands, how do we adapt when there is a change in who's in power at the local, state, federal level. So I want to make sure we give lots of time and space to Thea Montañez, who is the senior advisor to Governor Ned Lamont. Also is the chair of the Governor's Kids Cabinet. Previously, she has served as Chief Operating Officer of the City of Hartford, Connecticut. Now, I know you've done lots of work in the community. You've shared some powerful stories about yourself also growing up in Hartford and how that really inspired you into this work. Can you talk a little bit about the role of government, what government can and can't do, and what you've really done at the state and city level?
Sure, thank you. So I am somebody who never in a million years thought I would be working in the government. I was born and raised in Hartford, and Hartford is a city that's been challenged by violence for decades. It is also a very poor community, and my family and I experienced poverty and violence and addiction and mental illness. And so growing up, I had an escape plan early on that I was going to leave Hartford and live in New York City. And after college, I did that. And I discovered I am not a city girl. So I went back home to the place I never thought I would go back, just because I had so many painful memories and a lot of shame attached to my experience in Hartford. So you can imagine my surprise when I started working in the city of Hartford as its chief operating officer and now working for the governor. So, there's tons of reasons I am so proud to be a resident of the state of Connecticut. And that includes our congressional delegation with Senator Chris Murphy leading so many efforts. Yes. He's led so many critical efforts on this issue of gun violence prevention, including the passage of the 2022 bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And there were millions of dollars that were now available to communities like Hartford so that we could invest in mental health services, in community-based organizations that were on the ground working with persons impacted by community violence. If it were not for that funding, the city of Hartford would have never been able to create the state's first hospital-based violence intervention program, the reentry center, for example. There were so many programs, a civilian crisis response team to respond to 911 calls for persons that were struggling with addiction or suicidal ideation. But before those federal dollars, I remember Mayor Bronin came into office in 2016. I will never forget, we were meeting with our CFO 2 months, I think, into the administration, and she came with a little piece of paper in her hand, and she said, on this date, we will run out of money. We will not be able to pay the employees, and we were on the brink of bankruptcy. But we knew we still had to invest in community. We had to address this issue of public safety, and so philanthropy was a bridge, honestly, that allowed us to open a reentry center. I'm going to just say one last quick thing. So Hartford has the state's largest population of persons coming home from incarceration that are justice involved. So we opened up this reentry center so that there was a place that would welcome people home and give them opportunities to find employment and housing. And I poured my heart and soul into that project because I have a loved one who at the time was incarcerated for over 30 years because he was engaged in gun violence. And I remember thinking if he ever were released, I hoped he'd have a place to go that would welcome him back. But he was sentenced to 60 years when he was 19 years old. And so that wasn't an option. And fast forward, because of the support of the Yale Law School clinic, he was released. And so the first place he wanted to go was the reentry center in Hartford. So to walk into that reentry center with him almost 8 years later was really healing for me. And I know that hopefully it's brought that same experience of healing for a lot of families like mine in Hartford.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So we've heard about philanthropy, community organizing, government, a little bit of academia. You just mentioned the Yale School. One voice I also want to bring up to the table is business. Business, and we're sitting in New York, so let's also talk about the financial industry. So last year, the Milken Institute partnered with the Joyce Foundation, and we released a report the week before the presidential election. So we knew that was coming up. We're like, we're going to write this in a way that regardless of what happens, we want to set a roadmap and some strategies for what people can do. We separated this report into two sections. One is about philanthropy, so some key strategies that we believe are most effective for those in the philanthropic sector. And the other is about business. And that's something, for those of you who know the Milken Institute, really born of Wall Street, have a lot of people in finance and business in our network. And for us, when you heard me say in the beginning, what can we do where we sit? For us to try to bring in new voices and new capital, new resources for people who may say, how can I get involved? So this report, by the way, is freely available on our website. So Milken Institute, Gun Violence Prevention, you can download the report. There's also a place to click and sign up to learn more if you'd like there. We also recently, Crystal, are you here? We have Crystal Miller is here with me today. She's waving over there. So we were very happy to have Crystal here with us, who has extensive work with community violence organizations, working with local and state governments. So really, the Milken Institute is trying to figure out how we can be a bridge and do things to really bring new capital, new voices, and reach across sectors. So I want to go back to you, Julie, since we partnered on this report. When you think about the sort of roadmap or places where you think there are new sources of funding that are needed, or you've talked to us about the importance of partnerships, what sort of partners do you really want to see more of? What's been most effective, and what do you really look for in 2025?
Yeah, thanks so much for your partnership and also for the question. I think it's a really important question. So what you didn't mention earlier is that I'm a pediatrician, and I'm also, and I've worked in public health for over 20 years. And so I was thrilled to be invited to Northwell's event, because to see healthcare organizations coming together in this way to really play a role and champion this kind of work is unprecedented in this way. And so just thrilled to be here. So healthcare systems, as a pediatrician in public health for so long, wanting to have having some impact in gun violence prevention, having healthcare systems step up and say this is really important for us to do is really incredible, and it's pivotal. The other thing I would say is that I think the report and the recommendations that you all made, one of the leading recommendations is really that there's no one single strategy that will work for all entities. Different organizations have different strengths. So healthcare systems and providers have trusted voices. We heard from Amalgamated Bank in terms of how they identified a way to look at credit card use, to identify high-risk behaviors, high-risk individuals. So it's a matter of each sector kind of reflecting upon what the roles are that you play, what are the strengths that you bring to this issue, and how do you then act to make a difference. And that report really makes that clear, that it's not saying everybody needs to sing by the same hymnal, but it's a matter of like identifying what kinds of things are your superpowers, what strengths can you bring to this issue, and how do you then move forward effectively and bring in others to do that work together.
Great, thank you. All right, Pastor Mike, back to you. So you talked about philanthropy and businesses and finance capital kind of being some sort of stable forces as we have shifts in different sort of government leadership. One of the things that Crystal is leading is a business commission and our Thriving Communities Network. So if you're in conversation with Crystal and you're saying, here's what I need as somebody who's had long success, you've been in this a long time, what would you want the directive to be for a business commission and people joining? What do you want to see? What do you want to have them do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Traditionally, our work in the CVI space has had its most traction, I suppose, in philanthropy early on. In the last several years, obviously the organizing of a lot of us, many in this room, led to ARPA and the president putting, hundreds of millions of dollars in federal budgets. A lot of us who work locally have been able to get, tax initiatives to support local kind of violence prevention efforts. But a lot of that, I think, still views it as charity work. Nonprofits are positioned as charities and not as, I would say, self-determined institutions that can provide a long railway for empowerment, healing, and opportunity. And so if I were, speaking with financial institutional leaders, I would love to challenge all of us to think collectively together about how do we move beyond a sense of charity and into a sense of making money together by making communities more safe, right? Because finance industry, so I've been told, I'm a preacher, not a money person, I guess, although that may blur for some people sometimes. I've been told that the ROI, y'all got these nice acronyms. We got acronyms, y'all got acronyms, everybody got acronyms, right? But there is this sense of profit, right? Of doing good while doing well. All these ways of talking about how can we position this sector and this work in a way where capital is expanded to our communities in a solution-based manner, not in a extractive manner. And because many of our communities, our organizations, our nonprofits don't get access to capital beyond philanthropy, even competing for some of the federal dollars can be quite difficult. all of our communities have financial institutions that I want to believe would be interested in doing well and doing good at the same time. So I would want to have a conversation about capital, extending capital, investing in businesses and social enterprises that actually change the material conditions of our communities, so it makes it harder for someone to get caught in a lethal conflict.
Yeah, great, thank you. That's actually our very first recommendation in the report to business is preventing gun violence is good for business. You know, it's good for communities. So,
she emailed me that last night.
Well, I love also that you're bringing up social enterprise. You know, we're about to open in July the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream. And we look at that and we think about, okay, what is the American dream? We've heard dreams referenced earlier today. How can you have access to economic mobility, financial fluency, safety, health, if you are living in perpetual violence? So to be able to have that American dream, to look at the types of barriers that are there and what we can all be doing to remove them. So Thea, you now, we're thinking about the shift that has happened at the federal level in terms of funding that may come around. How does that shift the work that you do, and what sort of things, what sort of messages do you want to have for people that are either in your local community or more broadly? What is necessary for moving capital and, more importantly, having impact and change in this new environment?
You know, with everything going on, I have never felt more energized before. I feel more committed than ever to do this work, and I think, you know, there is such a focus on financial resources, and I get it, it makes sense. What I think we need more is courage. I think we need courage and the will to continue to do this work even when it is hard. And again, I think about and I reflect about my experience at the City of Hartford. We were facing bankruptcy. We had to stop grant funding. I will never forget the worst day at work was having to call 20 nonprofit partners to tell them we could no longer provide them funding. But I said that does not mean that it is not my responsibility to figure out where else I can find that money. And we did it. The mayor and I ended up calling, Hartford has a large corporate tax base, and we called our corporate partners and we said, we need your help. You're in this community and we can't do this and we need you to step up. And we are so, so lucky that they did that. So there is always going to be reasons why it is difficult, but that's not good enough not to do it. And you just got to power through and figure it out.
Wonderful. So we started with a message of power, having people have power in their communities. How do we find power and give it and share it? So really, wherever you sit, wherever you are, you've heard philanthropy, you've heard government, you've heard community organizing, business, finance, whoever you are, whoever you know, let's all work together. We can make change. We have been making change in this environment and beyond. There is hope. We just have to do it together. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to Northwell.